Okay. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Carrie Seidman. I'm one of the original founders of Sarasota Strong. And somehow my script just disappeared. Hang on. Hang on one second. Sorry about that. I think most of you have already very thoughtfully muted yourselves, but if you would do that as we go through our presentation, and then for the last half hour or so, we will take questions. If you think of a question while our speaker is speaking, please feel free to put it in the chat, and we will get to those questions as soon as we open it up for questions. As Annalise said, we're also recording this conversation and also streaming it on Facebook Live because we want to make it available for others for later viewing. So if you do not want to be recorded, please feel free to turn your cameras off. So just to get started, we're certainly happy to have those of you who are returning, coming back to join us again. But for those of you who are new, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Sarasota Strong. Sarasota Strong is a growing group of Sarasota County neighbors committed to learning about trauma and responding to its impact. And we started out in Sarasota County at any rate, but as you could see from all of the people who've joined us tonight, due to the pandemic, when we moved to virtual platforms, we started getting a much broader audience. So we welcome all of you who are with us tonight, especially our international visitors. Our mission at Sarasota Strong is to promote community-wide trauma awareness through healing, education, action, and leadership. And our vision is to create a community that cares for itself. If you are interested in getting involved beyond just participating in our forums, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. Our website is www.sarasotastrong.org, or you can email us at sarasotastrong@gmail.com. We're always our topics for our forums are really driven by you. So please feel free to give us any of your ideas of what you'd like us to have a conversation about. Tonight's presentation is called Difficult Encounters and Hard Conversations. And I would guess that everyone who's on this Zoom right now has probably had a few of those in the past couple of years. Our society is increasingly divided by political and social polarization, and anger and resentment toward the quote unquote the other at times erupts into public confrontation. Tonight we had intended to have two speakers. One of our speakers, Betsy Friedman, unfortunately is indisposed. She had a oral surgery event this morning that made her unable to participate tonight, but we're very happy to have Mark Olson with us. He'll be discussing how unresolved trauma and dysregulated emotional states contribute to that anger and hostility that we sometimes encounter today. And hopefully he'll also provide us with some tips to responding to conflict in a trauma-informed manner and with compassionate communication. And before I introduce Mark, I just thought it would be interesting to share with you an interview that I listened to the other day with the New York Times reporter who has been assigned to cover all the trials of the people who were arrested in the January 6th insurrection. And so he's made this whole spreadsheet of people who were involved in that event. And the interviewer asked him, is there anything that was a common denominator among all of these people that you could see? And he said, actually, yes, there was a very clear common denominator. And it was that virtually all of them had been through some significant trauma in their lives. So I thought that was very, very interesting and revelatory. So our speaker tonight is Mark Olson. Mark has an MA in education and a PhD in neuroscience from the University of Illinois. He specializes in cognitive and behavioral neuropsychology and neuroanatomy. He has studied memory, attention, and eye movements. He's the owner and director of the Pacific Center for Awareness and Bodywork in Kauai, Hawaii, as well as an aquatic therapist and a published author. He has several recent articles that he may share with us. He volunteers on the review board for Sarasota Strong, and he teaches in-person classes at his school in Hawaii and online classes at Affinity Wellness Education. Mark is now an at least part-time resident of Sarasota, and he's been here for about a year. We're so happy to have him with us today. And Mark, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Carrie. Well, I'm super excited to be here and exploring these topics with you guys. I moved to, like you said, I moved to Sarasota about a year ago. And before I moved here, before I even knew I was going to move to Sarasota, I was checking out, what Sarasota has to offer, what kinds of things I might want to participate in, or people I want to connect with. And the one group that I found that I wanted to connect with was this one. So I reached out a little over a year ago to find out more about what Sarasota Strong is all about. So just pretty exciting to watch that unfold over the course of over a year. So before I dive into any material, I'll just tell you a little bit about my background so you have a sense of where I'm coming from. As Carrie mentioned, I have a PhD in neuroscience, and I certainly wasn't thinking about trauma when I was exploring neuroscience at the time. But I was interested in how we as human beings function. Why do we think the way we do? Why do we feel the way we do? Why do we behave the way we do? So that obviously connects. And after I got my degree, I ended up going out to Hawaii and I studied massage. And this didn't come together in a methodical way, but I ultimately realized that there's really some interesting things about bodywork that I wouldn't have necessarily expected, and they were particularly interesting to me as a neuroscientist in terms of the psychological effects of bodywork. So over time, I explored that, and now I'm running a school where I've basically neuroscience-ified the program, but I've also trauma-informed-ified the program. Because when I first took over the program, I just realized there's some things that need to be adjusted, and some of them were obvious and some of them not so obvious. And one of the not so obvious things was the trauma piece, that some of the things that were happening in the class, I realize now, or a little while ago, were re-traumatizing. And I didn't have a term for that at the time, but eventually realized, okay, this is what's happening, and this is what we need to do this differently. And so I've totally dived into this topic about how massage therapy needs to be trauma informed, and classrooms need to be trauma informed, and what that looks like. And so before I go into the difficult conversations, I just want to talk a little bit about how that relates in my classroom, because I think it'll inform this topic about this difficult discussions. So to be trauma informed in a massage classroom, what does that mean? There's standards for what trauma informed means, but it's not regulated or anything like that. It certainly means teaching people about what trauma is and maybe talking about the neuroscience of it. More than that, it would be talking about, well, what are you going to do if something related to trauma comes up in a massage setting? That's something that you should be skilled at, kind of like in a first aid sort of way. But it's so we do those things. but for me, it also involves, well, it involves a deeper dive into developmental trauma. So a lot of times discussions about trauma don't go into developmental trauma because it's a lot more complicated than shock trauma. So we explore developmental trauma, both like what that's going to look like in clients and also what is that in ourselves, because clients come in and they act in the way they act, and then we respond to it based on our own past experiences and traumas. And so there's a little bit of an exploration that we have, I should say, not a little bit, a lot, of what's going on. Why is that person bothering you but not me, or vice versa? So, and the reason we do that is because we want to show up for people as effectively as possible, and we don't want to let those things get in our way. So those are some of the content things that we do. And then it also, to me, means how I structure the classroom. And you get just any group of people together and there's trauma dynamics happening. But that's especially true in a classroom because people are there together for a while, and it's especially true in a massage classroom. And to explain why, I want to just make a little side note about developmental trauma. So a lot of times when people, I don't know if this is true, but I get the impression that when people think about trauma, they think about it in sort of a commonsensical sort of way, where we think, okay, some things happened that were not so pleasant, they were stress, and now there's these long-term effects of stress. And those aren't necessarily simple, but you can kind of understand it, that, okay, people might respond in a less functional way because of these stressful events. Their autonomic nervous system gets going, fight, flight, and freeze. That's going to turn off frontal functions, so they're maybe not going to think as well or be as able to regulate their emotions. So that tends to be the conversation around developmental trauma, and that's around trauma in general, and that's very relevant, of course, and we'll talk about that some more in a few minutes. But there's also this other piece about developmental trauma that relates to the ACE study. And I think of this as very counterintuitive and not common sense. And that is that for individuals during their childhood, when things didn't go so well with their parents, they were abused or neglected, something very nonsensical happened. Instead of the child concluding, oh, well, my parents are just not doing a great job and I should be upset with them. And this is all precognitive, but just kind of wording this out. Instead, what happens is, oh, there must be something wrong with me. And it's a survival mechanism, really, because you need your parents to survive. And so it's intolerable to think that somehow there's something wrong with the parents. So it's much easier to say, well, it must be me. And so with early childhood trauma, what happens is a kind of deep sense of shame or a sense of unworthiness and just existing. So there's still this part, though, that says I am worthy and I have these desires and needs and I want them to be fulfilled. But there's this strategy that comes up and says, no, you don't, because if you do that, then you have to reconcile this idea that your parents aren't really there for you. And that is this we call this critical essential dilemma, core dilemma, that exists early on and then just continues through adulthood. And it doesn't exist in really a conscious level, but it impacts everything. And so what happens later on as an adult, and we see this in the ACE study, where someone's moving towards something that they want. And like in the ACE study, it was people were dieting. They set goals for what they wanted to achieve. And then right before they achieved it, all these people quit and didn't achieve it. And what they found was this piece about, basically, I don't feel worthy to achieve it. And so I'm gonna make sure I don't, because that's gonna press up against that early strategic, we call foreclosure. I'm like, I have to keep with this idea that I'm not okay. And so I can maintain this attachment relationship with my parents. So that's counterintuitive, right? Because what would be intuitive would be, hey, wouldn't it be great to succeed in something? Maybe you succeed in something and then that's going to make you feel better about yourself. And I think a lot of times there's a common conversation that happens where people talk like that. Well, if we just do things that kind of boost your ego a little bit and sense of empowerment, that'll be better. And there's value in that too. But if we don't understand that there's this key component of that's working against that, then we don't really understand why a lot of things don't actually work. So in a massage school setting, okay, I gotta say one more thing. So one of the things that happens with early childhood trauma, and because of all the things I described, is individuals often have trouble connecting with other people in life, in relationships as adults, or they might have trouble stating their needs, or they might have trouble with autonomy or trust. And with that connection piece in particular, individuals with the early childhood trauma could be, they want connection, their true self really wants connection, but their strategic self, not so much. They have to feel like they're worthy to have connection. And so this is something that comes up, like individuals will find ways to not really be connected. They want to be connected, but it's very uncomfortable to be connected. So there's this push and pull that occurs all the time. And okay, so with that in mind, in a massage setting, people sign up for a massage, they're thinking this is going to be great. Look, I'm going to sign up, I'm going to do this thing that's going to be relaxing, that's going to be de-stressing. I'm going to be with all these people who are caring. That's going to fit my needs for connection, which I'm trying to meet. So it sounds like it would just be perfect. And it is closer to perfect for some people, but for those who have the early childhood trauma and who want the connection, they're running straight into their core dilemma. And so they get there, and we could do something that feels really good. It's really easy to do things that feel really good in a massage school. But then something really weird happens that's not intuitive, and they go home, they felt this real sense of goodness, but that goes right against that strategy. And for reasons they can't really put words to, they'll start saying things like, I don't know if this is for me. Or those people at the school, they're not my people, or there's something wrong with them, or they'll project out, or they'll internalize it and be like, I don't know what I was thinking that I could do this. It can go any number of ways. Ultimately, though, it's threatening their ability to be and participate in this setting. And that's going to be true really for any classroom, but especially with massage, because there's so many things that make people feel good in that setting. So knowing that, I've designed my program in a way to make sure that we don't go straight into those positive feelings. I step it in a particular way, and I'm very aware, and I can usually identify which individuals these are with the early trauma. So I know to make sure that I design the curriculum in such a way that watches for them first and make sure that they're taken care of before we move on, because those with less trauma, they're going to be fine. I don't have to watch for them early on. They'll get their needs met eventually. So I look out for these individuals first, and I expect certain kinds of responses. And then I know how to respond to that, because I forgot to mention that I'm also a certified practitioner in NARM, which stands for the Neuroaffective Relational Model, which is a approach that's developed for psychotherapists specifically for developmental trauma. So I've incorporated what I've learned that's for psychotherapists into my program, not to do psychotherapy, but to know how to engage more effectively when trauma shows up in the room. Okay, so that's a little bit about where I'm coming from in my classes with bodywork, and I hope that gives you a little bit of sense of where I'm coming from and how that might relate to the rest of the day. So let's see if there's anything else I wanted to say to that. Okay, so when we're talking about difficult conversations, and I'm very interested in this topic of difficult conversations, and I often find myself in them, and I take it as a challenge to find my way through it. And like the one example occurred like 15 years ago, sometime after 9/11, where I was in 2 chat rooms at the same time. And one chat room was a group of people who thought that all of 9/11 was made up. And another group was a group that thought that it was exactly how we were told it was. And I was having conversations with both groups at the same time and asking curious questions. Like, well, I think the other group makes a good point. And I was saying that in both groups. And I was just getting attacked left and right by both groups at the same time. I mean, everybody was calling me names and all sorts of things. And I thought, well, this is really interesting because neither group knows that I'm having this conversation with the other group. And they both have pigeonholed me as like the opposite enemy, the them. Obviously I can't think for myself, the kind of same things like that. So I was trying to figure out, how can I have these conversations with these people? And I mean, one of the secrets is to not try to do it online because it's next to impossible. But that's another topic, doing it online. So I have a vested interest in how to do this. And so with individuals with trauma, first thing I'll say is that individuals who have trauma are more prone to radicalization. And radicalization exists on a continuum. So, you don't have to be fighting for Al Qaeda to be radicalized. There's a whole, you might have friends who you might not call radicalized, but are, somewhere else in the continuum. So that's the first thing, is that's the case. Now, there isn't a simple answer to why to more radicalization. There's been studies on this. There's lots of different factors, and I'm going to go over these factors right now. And I got a list in front of me here, so I apologize. I'm going to be sort of reading this to make sure I don't miss anything. So some of the common sense things are the following. One is that, if you feel like you're powerless as a child, that may continue as an adult. You may have a need to find a way to feel powerful. And so getting involved with different groups might be one way to do that. Another thing that is the case is that individuals who have experienced particular kind of abusive situations in their family, they usually seek out those same kind of dynamics later on as adults, whether that's social ones or romantic ones or even political ones. So if you were raised with a narcissistic parent, you may find narcissistic leaders very appealing. Well, that's one other aspect. There's an element of having poor role modeling in the family of origin. So if you didn't know how to resolve conflicts or manage emotions in your family, it's probably not going to just show up automatically when you're having political conversations with people that think differently than you. Then there's, of course, the chronic stress piece. If you weren't cared for, effectively enough as a child, that, brings in fear, you have all this amygdala activity. The autonomic nervous system is just more easily engaged, and it's also slower to disengage. That's just research. And that just continues on through adults. So whenever you get those autonomic responses, that also discourages like nuanced thinking, that encourages like a black and white thinking. So of course you can see how black and white thinking is going to contribute to less effective conversations. So there's going to be scapegoating there. There's lack of empathy. There's more dehumanization. All of that is contributed by these physiological responses. And even one of the stress responses is dissociation. And they find in the radicalization literature that individuals who dissociate are easier to, they have an easier time engaging in violence towards others without really having, like, feeling the impact. So if you run your car into a crowd of people who are other than you, you may not really feel the, gosh, I just hurt a bunch of people quality as much if there's this dissociation going on. So that's present, especially with people who are extreme trauma. And then on kind of a other side of the coin to this is individuals with a lot of trauma who are radicalized. They find that they have, they're usually engaged in their activities that they are because they saw somebody that they cared about being harmed. And what they're trying to do is make something right. They're seeking justice. So that's an important piece to keep in mind. I think that there's a good intention underneath what may seem like something very not positive. Okay, so those are some of the more simple things, and then I want to dive into some of the more complex. So the complex is going to plug back into those developmental trauma dynamics I was pointing to before. So individuals with trauma, if they have attachment relationships that don't develop very well, and they have trouble developing trust, and this idea that no one's really there to protect me, or no one's really there to care for me. So trust, autonomy, expressing needs, connection with others, those all become issues. And I mentioned before this issue about connection. There's often a huge disconnection, a huge desire to have connection, but also a complete lack of satisfaction with connection. So a lot of individuals in this situation, they seek out groups where they can feel connected and they can have meaning in what they're doing. And that often means getting involved in a group that is radical. And they identify with it. So if you try to have a logical argument with them about it, it's not really about logic. It's about, I am affiliated with this group, and that affiliation means something very deep to me. This is my connection that I so much want. And if I can't hear your arguments, I don't want to hear your arguments because I need to maintain this connection. So that's one thing. Also, individuals with trauma, there's a grief there. There's a loss of something that they deserved to have. And it's much easier to mask grief with anger. Way easier to feel anger. With anger, you can get up in the morning and do stuff. With grief, it's pretty hard to get out of bed. So a lot of individuals, have unspoken grief. They're not even aware of grief. All they know is anger. And so that's what comes up when you're talking with them. And that anger is not so much about the ideas and about you. It's really a mask for something that's about much deeper hurt. And then another piece is that the autonomy issue that comes up is, and we hear this a lot, people talking about wanting freedom and autonomy. And freedom and autonomy are definitely important things, but oftentimes what's happening is that individuals, maybe they had okay attachments, but they didn't get to de-individuate from their parents properly. And so they have this thing that continues through adulthood where they didn't really get to separate well. And so when they talk about freedom, it's kind of a proxy war for their fight with their parents for autonomy. And I think that's really important to keep in mind when people are talking about freedom, that it might not really be about freedom. All right, so yeah, so some of the research shows that people who get recruited, they often get recruited by like lots of violent videos and getting the autonomic nervous system stirred up. So I think that's an interesting piece to know about. It's very similar to often what happens in like religious cults. And we also see similar dynamics in like spiritual circles, like New Age circles. And also in those circles, there's a high level of early trauma where being, quote, spiritual allows one to have a sense of connection without really having connection. It's a pseudo connection. So it doesn't press up against those strategies, but it still gives enough of a sense of connection. But anyway, there's a similar kind of thing going on around freedom. And so that's why we've seen in recent years kind of a blending of like New Age spiritual groups with alt-right groups there. There's a common factor of early childhood trauma in both. Okay, so that's a little background on on content, and I can see I'm talking longer than I maybe had planned, but that's okay. So things to do when you're encountering people who are coming at you with different ideas, different beliefs, and they're not doing it in a very charitable way. Well, first of all, is to have, obviously compassion for what they might have gone through, and know that they are probably acting out of good intention, even though their strategy may not be as effective as we might think it should be. So the first thing to do is to listen and really listen to what they're saying and to try to develop rapport. Easier said than done, of course. To remember that they have positive intentions and to not make being wrong a moral condition. Because we've all been wrong before about something. And at this moment in time, whatever they think might be something that they someday think was wrong. And that just right now they think is right. So we have to be charitable and realize this is just a moment in time and it's not a moral condition. A lot of times people hold on to the beliefs that they have because they are too embarrassed to admit that they're wrong. So we have to make sure we're not pummeling them into being embarrassed for being wrong. We have to build a golden bridge for them. Like, oh, I can see how you think that way, or I used to think that way too, or some way to make it okay so they can come back. A lot of people in cults, they stay in cults because they don't know anybody who's going to accept them back. All right, another thing to do is to create some cracks in their perspective about us and them. They think you are this other entity that's very different from them, and you want to help them see that you are similar to them. So one way to do that is whatever side you might be they're putting you on, you want to acknowledge any extremists on your own side. Because nothing, that's one of the ways that the polarization occurs, is that each side points to the extremists and then thinks everybody is one of them. So if you immediately distinguish yourself from the extremists that they're talking about, then you get a little closer. So you have to acknowledge, yeah, that group over there that's doing that you're talking about, I disagree with what they're doing. That's important to say. Also, you want to use language that's not increasing the distance. So instead of saying your idea, say things like that idea. Or instead of saying I disagree, say I'm skeptical. These little bits of language can make a big difference. And if we were doing an exercise, I would have us all practicing something like, your idea about how the toilet paper should roll is, I completely disagree with, and here the difference between that and that idea about how the toilet paper should roll, I'm skeptical about that. It's fun example because people probably feel strongly, but it doesn't really matter too much. The other thing to do is to make what I call contact statements. And that is to hear what they're saying and to make a statement about what they're saying that they haven't said. You go underneath what they're saying. And they're called contact statements because you're trying to make contact with the person. So they might sound like things like, feeling overwhelmed, huh? Or had a really rough day, huh? Or you really care a lot about that person, huh? They didn't say those things in those words, but that's the main thing. And if you can find that, and this is what I want to practice a little bit with you in the time we have, that's going to feel like they heard you and you care there and they feel seen. And that will eliminate a little bit of the distance between you. And it sounds so simple and it's something you all probably do all the time, but developing it as a skill is a whole other thing. And some of the things that I'm going to be talking about here are from the book Impossible Conversations. And this is mentioned in that book. And it's interesting because this is one of the first things that I teach in my massage program is how to do contact statements. But funnily enough, in the Impossible Conversations book, this is what they suggest if you're trying to do hostage negotiation. So that just tells you something about how powerful contact statements are. If this is what they recommend as experts in hostage negotiation, think how powerful it could be if you're just having a difficult conversation about politics. So hearing what they're saying, whatever it is, and trying to find what's the feeling underneath it, what's their relationship to what they're talking about. And some of what they're talking about has to do with values. So we all have the same common values, things like autonomy and care and loyalty. And research has been done that shows like what the main ones are and that we all share them, but we share them in different proportions. And usually the difference between conservatives and liberals has a difference between certain values. But the fact that even though the proportions are different in liberals and conservatives, we still all share them. So even if someone from the other group is expressing one, you could still connect with them about that. You can say, sounds like caring for people is really important to you. Or it sounds like autonomy is really important for you. Like, it's really important for me too. So you did a contact statement there and you've lessened the gap between you and them. That's the kind of thing that like those little statements like there can go a long way. So I have a number of things that I might say, but we'll save it for the deep dive later. So I just want to stop there and dive into some practice with you guys in the time we have. So I want to do these contact statements with you, and I want them to be value-based. So I'm going to say a few things that you might hear people say, and I want you can text this in or speak. I don't know which is the best way to do it. Like, what's the value that's being expressed? And there might be more than one that's the right answer. So if someone comes to you and says, the problem with America these days is that there's a bunch of elites running everything and they're making all the laws, so we need to drain the swamp. What's the value that person is trying to get to? You can type it in or raise your hand. I don't know how to. see, equality, honesty, integrity, community, oppression, belonging, everyone to participate in democracy. Yeah. Yeah. All those are good. And I don't think there's like just one answer. So, and the nice thing about contact statements is that if you go for one and you try it, you say, you really care a lot about equality, huh? If that's not really what it's about for them, if it's about oppression or if it's about community instead, what they're probably going to do is they're going to say, well, not really equality. It's really about community. So you just invited them to explain more about where they're at. So that's perfect. If you do like 3 contact statements in a row and miss, then that might be a problem. But usually you're going to get really close and they're going to be like, yeah, and maybe a little bit about some of this too. So now you're developing rapport because you're going back and forth. Okay, let's try another one. That person who won that race used to be a man, and now she's a woman. She should compete with the men, not the women. Fairness. Fairness. Fear. Tradition. Lack of understanding. Tradition is good. I wasn't sure. Any others? I think those are right on. So that's really great here that we have fairness and fear, because fear is the feeling they're having. So you could have a contact statement about how they're feeling, whereas fairness might be the value. So either one of those could be good. I think when we're having socio-political conversations, it might be better to connect with the values, but it depends. If you go for emotions, you're going to be building sort of more like social connection with them, like more human connection. But if they are kind of like, I don't know you, and so if you try to speculate about my feelings, that might push them away a little bit. So you have to judge whether that is like too much too soon. Oh, change. Entirely new kind of parent. Okay, so I'm going to come back to the question later on in the Q&A. Yeah, so some of these things will be easier to say, they really care about fairness, huh? And then if they're having a lack of understanding, that's a little harder to explore. I'm going to go through more examples and then we can maybe explore that more in the Q&A. Okay, next example. If you think trans women should use men's bathrooms, you're a jerk. Don't you understand what can happen to them if you force them to do that? What's the value? Safety, empathy, concern for the safety of women. Yeah. So yeah, feeling threatened. So yeah, so really care about people's safety, huh? You really care about people a lot, huh? And then feeling threatened. Yeah, that's what that one's more complicated. Privacy, awkward. You feel awkward about that. You're feeling kind of awkward about that, huh? That'd be trickier. But maybe it could work. I like awkward. Yeah, let's explore that one more too in the Q&A. Here, let's do the next one. I think it's important for people to have choices, but I think it's more important that someone speaks for the unborn. They're a person like me, and I don't believe murder is okay. What's the value that person's expressing? Right to life, sanctity of life, their faith. Yeah, you really believe in the sanctity of life. Sanctity of life is really important to you, huh? Morality, family. Family is really important to you. Morality is really important to you. So these are all good. I like sanctity of life, protecting the vulnerable. I really like that. So again, you don't have to agree with their ultimate conclusion. Right now, you're just trying to build rapport and have them make sure that they know that you know where they're at. That has to happen before anything else can happen. So let's do the next one. No one's going to tell me what to do. You can't make me wear a mask or get a vaccine. Independence, privacy, freedom, autonomy, personal choice, freedom of choice. Yeah. So all those would be good. Freedom of choice is really important to you. Yeah. Autonomy is really important to you. Privacy is really important to you. So that's going to go really far if you say that. That's so different than just going straight into you talking about how their view is, flawed somehow. How about this one? Trying to kill us. Not sure what you mean by that one. I'm going to do the next one. How can you not wear a mask when you work with elderly people? Concern for others, care for older people, public health. Public health, yep. Yeah, so this phrase, you really care about, fill in the blank, and adding a huh on the end of it. You don't have to add the huh, but it's a little easier to say, usually, if you do. You can be there's a wider range of tone that you can use in the expression and still get away with it. If you don't use the word huh, you got to say it just right. Age care. Last one, you're either with us or against us. Unity. Community. Commitment. Social justice. Belonging. Allegiance. Loyalty. Yeah. All really good. Yep. All right. So I think you got the hang of that. I imagine many of you do that already. In Canada, we would say, hey, yeah, definitely, definitely. Really care about belonging, eh? Okay, so this is kind of the kind of thing we could, literally practice for hours to get really good at it. And, again, these are just first steps for establishing some rapport and creating some less distance between the two of you. And I'm going to add to this before we go to Q&A that if you're interested in what these values are, Jonathan Haidt is author and researcher who has studied this, Haidt, I believe. So his book on moral dialects is really great. And again, that Impossible Conversations book provides a lot of tips that I've mentioned some of. It's not the best written book, but it has some really cool things in it. Moral dialects, yeah. A couple other things that I'll just mention from those texts is the easy temptation to want to tell somebody else your point of view right away is the last thing you should do. You know, you should, if possible, not tell people what you think, not explain why their perspective is wrong. You should connect with their common values. You should create rapport, and you should respond to them ultimately by reflecting back to them what their view is. And you should do it so well that they would say, yes, that's exactly right. I couldn't have said it better. You do all of that before saying a word about what you think. That would be the ideal. And there's a whole bunch of other things to do, but we're out of time. So I will bring it. Yes, it requires a great deal of patience. And I don't want to give anyone the impression that I succeed in this on a regular basis or anything, but sometimes. How do you regulate your emotional response to allow you to not respond? Yeah, social media is a whole other thing for sure. And even in the Impossible Conversations book, they say, don't try any of these things on social media, it won't work. But I have ignored their advice, and I have had success on social media as well as failures. But it is much harder on social media for sure. How do I regulate my emotional response? Well, that's a whole other topic of, breathing and being present and really focusing on that this person is just as precious as everybody else and what they've been through. I try to remind myself that this person has the same hopes and dreams, and they've had eliminated the same kinds of human experiences that I have, maybe to a more traumatic degree. And that helps sometimes. Carrie's response. One way that helps is to not answer right away. Yes. Yep. To just practice listening.
I think we can go ahead and open it up to if anyone wants to raise their hand or just turn on their mic and ask a question, or maybe share something what you thought about the exercise Mark did. We can go ahead and do that. I think there's a small enough group here for us to do that. So, or we can just keep going in the chat and Mark can read answers or questions in the chat there. We can answer. Don't all jump at once. Let's see here. Dana, yeah, you can go ahead and turn your mic off and ask a question if you have one.
Hi, yeah. Well, I have two questions, if I can be allowed to. So I guess the first question I have is, how do you know when someone is just not reachable, and that you're almost quote unquote wasting your energy with someone, and that energy should be put elsewhere? And just an example, for many years, I've had conversations with someone about climate change, man-made climate change, and they refuse to believe it after 10 plus years. In the last conversation I had with them, and they still spouted ridiculous things. And I just finally realized, I'm like, they don't want to get it, So, and then I said to myself, oh my God, did I waste all these years trying to convince an individual or a couple? So I guess I was just trying to figure out when to quote unquote cut your losses and move on. And
Right.
and have that answer. And if I could ask a second one too. Should I ask a second one? Or for the answer?
How about well, whichever way you want to do it.
If you want to answer the first, so it's
Okay.
easier.
Well, I don't have a, soundbite answer for that, because I think there's just so many different kinds of situations. But I do think that one thing that guides me is the idea that my success is not measured in where I get to in this conversation. And my goal in the conversation is not to get resolution in that conversation. My goal is to move things 1 millimeter, or to create a little bit less gap between us, or to create a little crack in their thinking. And that's one of the things I talk about in the Possible Conversations book is if you don't talk and you just let them talk, they will find their own cracks, because ultimately there's going to be a crack in the logic. So when people talk and explain what they think, they usually find it. So anyway, all I want to do is move things a tiny bit. So if you have the conversation with them over and over and over and over again, you may not see any progress. But the other thing that with this is, if you're still with them, you're communicating to them something about like, I'm still here. I didn't leave you because we're different. And there may come a day where, who knows, 20 years from now, it's like, even though I raged against you about your ideas, you still stuck with me. And maybe then it'll come around. So yeah, we can't be having, arguments with everybody on the planet. We have to do things that work for us. So it's okay if we decide too much. But I have conversations with people, and all my other friends say, I don't know why you bother, Mark. With this person is beyond the pale. They're completely unreachable. But then I know, like this, I'm thinking about one person in particular that seems, if you see what he says to me on Facebook, you'd think there's no way. But then he'll reach out to me and say, can I help you with your marketing? Because that's what I do. And I'm like, wow, didn't see that coming. So, I think it's because he knows that I keep coming back and I keep treating him as a human being. So I don't know if that answers it, but.
Yeah. Well, that kind of leads to my second question, because, I've done reading on this, and I was reading some articles and different sources, newspapers, but it was multiple articles I'm just putting together, but it was talking about individuals who, it was like family members going to therapists, psychologists for help with their family members or whatnot, who have, joined QAnon or, January 6th, or just, the big lie, all this other militias, right-wing militias. And when all those articles together, it's like there was a theme of all the psychologists were saying from their perspective and experience, the only thing that was going to change them was, number one, you can't change them. Number one, they have to want to change on their own. But number two, there has to be consequences and accountability. So they either have to lose their spouse, lose their job, lose their friends, end up in jail. So in other words, they were saying something has to rock their foundation, and consequences and accountability are also something that can shake someone back into reality. So, I'm wondering your thoughts about that, because sometimes I think if you I get what you say, absolutely, about staying with the person. I get it. But I also see another side where there, when are there not consequences to when you think and do these unethical things, that, I don't want you to think I'm all right with it, that kind of thing. So I'm wondering about your thought on consequences and accountability.
Yeah, I mean, well, those consequences might not be coming from you though. So,
Yeah,
um, so, if those things happen, it's good if you were the person who is still around to like make that connection again. 'Cause that's definitely true with cults. I mean, it's a huge topic. So, I don't have a simple answer, but yeah, I mean, things have to, things often have to, um, something big has to happen oftentimes to shake people. I mean, that's often why um, trauma can be really healing, because sometimes a huge traumatic event is the only thing that will shake people from their psychological strategies.
yeah.
So, uh, I don't know. I feel like we
I,
could probably talk for a long time, and I'm also not sure if I should keep going or address
yeah,
any
no, I
questions.
don't want to hog all the time, but thank you. Thank you
I
for your
think
answer.
I just want to like add on to that. You talked about like, being there for the person, or not necessarily just disappearing, realizing, we have our differences, calling it quits and just separating ways. I feel like I was like that, years ago. I would delete people left and right on social media because I just couldn't stand the disagreements all the time. And then I realized that I was not only making an echo chamber for myself, but for them. And we were only ever going to see, our group's viewpoints. And when I stopped doing that, I actually realized that I was getting through to some people that I didn't think I would have got through to. Even just simple things about like the baby formula shortage, posting conspiracies that, they're doing it on purpose and all of this stuff. And, I kind of got them to think a little deeper about that. So I think, obviously knowing where to expend your energy and to stop is important. And that line can be kind of blurry sometimes. And I think your body kind of gives you those physical responses. You feel that feeling in your stomach. You're like, okay, I just need to stop and walk away. But also just not completely cutting everyone off, I think has really helped me in like changing where that conversation is going. Like he said, like making that division between us just a little bit smaller, because if I were to cut these people off, then we're completely divided. There's no chance of us coming back together at all. So I think that was probably like a big step for me personally, was realizing I can't just cut a lot of people off, as easy as it may be. Though there are situations where, some person is toxic and it's just not good energy for you, you have to make that choice. But I just wanted to add that little bit, that I think, you know, being present for everyone is a very important thing to do. That's my
Thank you
little
I
very
thought.
much.
just want, sorry,
I just want to say thank you very much.
I just want to second what both Annalise and Mark were saying, and I'm just briefly share my personal experience. A lot of you know that I write an opinion column for the Sarasota Herald Tribune and have for a number of years. And I perhaps foolishly, when I first started the column, promised that I would respond to anyone who wrote to me whenever they wrote to me. And I have maintained that. And it's gotten more difficult over the last few years, as you can imagine, because if you're writing an opinion, the people who are most likely to write to you are the people who disagree with your opinion. And sometimes they are rather vicious and sometimes personal in attacking your opinion, because they're writing to you through email, which is private. But I've learned a lot of what Mark is talking about tonight just by trying to respond to readers' emails. thank God they're emails, so I have time to think before I write them and I have the right approach rather than my knee-jerk response to what they may say. I have found it really interesting to allow them to, express themselves, not to take it confrontational, but sort of, say, gee, that's interesting. What do you think in your upbringing made you feel that way? Or something like that. And, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes we have 4 or 5 emails back and forth, and I finally just kind of give up. But I've also had instances where I've had someone write to me really angry, pretty nasty. And, 4 or 5 emails later, she's saying, well, my granddaughter wants to be a writer. What writing program would you recommend, or what schools do you think would be good? So I think if you can find little ways, as Mark said, to get away from the issue that they're focused on, and talk about something human that you both share, I found that can be really successful. And it was really interesting. This summer, I had a fairly significant health incident, and I ended up writing about it in my column. And all of these people who had written me pretty vicious, nasty emails before all wrote and said, oh dear, I'm so sorry that you're going through that, and I really hope you feel better. And so, even the people that we think they can't have a heart from what they're saying, sometimes, they're still human. They still get that when somebody's, sick and in the hospital, they feel some compassion. So I don't know. I try to find something outside of just the, core issue that they're focused on that we can connect on.
Yeah. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you very much.
I thought I had seen someone else's hand raised, but it went down. I didn't catch who it was. I'm not sure
There's
if
also
anyone.
some chat pieces too.
Oh yeah, if you see something in the chat you want to get to here. Let's see. Oh yeah, a bunch of stuff coming in. An entirely new kind of parenting education that reaches everyone everywhere. It could be a powerful. Oh, another that just scrolled away. Where'd that go?
Yeah. I mean, really, it all starts with parenting, childhood. That's where it all starts. That's a huge task.
Yeah, I was going to say that's also probably the hardest. I mean, it's not something you can regulate.
Yep, it's the most important and it's the hardest.
Right.
Did anyone else have any questions or maybe experiences they wanted to share?
Colleen had posted in the chat about, and now I can't find it, but about she has a friend whose husband was involved in the January 6th episode, and she supports him but doesn't acknowledge his involvement. She's very angry, and Colleen said it isn't worth it to try to sorry, I'm having a hard time with my chat. It isn't worth it trying to try to change her mind. You just need to let her vent, because she's obviously very, conflicted about it within herself, or very angry about it within herself. What do you think about that, Mark, about just letting someone vent? Is there a danger in that?
Letting her vent. I think I want to know more about what she means by that. I mean, clearly, people will have to change when they want to change or when they need to change. And I can imagine that the level of dissonance there would be really high and hard to figure out how to navigate. I would have compassion for the difficulty of that for sure.
I can give some context. I said
Okay.
it. I think it's just, and I probably should have it's too long of a thing to explain in a chat. It's a friend of mine she's been my friend since we were in elementary school. So she is one of my oldest and best friends. So what I mean by letting her vent is I will support her as a person. And because she isn't through the stages, I don't think, of acceptance here, it's not worth the trying to, break into that with some of the statements and things like that, to try to break into that yet. And so sometimes I think it's important just to let people talk and just listen to them and not, I usually just don't even say anything. Because I don't want to get into that, something that could hurt a friendship.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I would just listen. I might say something like, "What's that like for you?" That would probably be the main thing I would say. But if you can tell that they're just, I don't even want to talk about how I feel at all, or what, but that's the kind of phrase that I would use as the next step before getting into what we just did about values, because it sounds like she's trying to process. So really you're not trying to have a, well, let's get into our different beliefs kind of thing. You're trying to really help her through it.
Right.
Yeah. It sounds really hard.
That's a good one.
Well, I'd say that, I'd say that sounds really hard.
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot. Those are contact statements, I might say.
Yeah, that's good.
If you're looking for something to say, but if it just seems like I'm just listening and that seems to be what is needed right here, then that's perfect too.
Yeah, as long as she's not looking for validation from you, I think. Yeah, that's probably.
No, thankfully not.
Yeah, that's probably a whole different ball game there.
It gets complicated when people want to collude with them.
Yeah.
That's like next level.
Well, this has been great. Any other questions or experiences people want to talk about? A connection on a human level to the things we all care about, family, children, whatever, is so important. Very true.
Are we about ready to wrap up, Annalise? Is there anybody else who'd like to post a last question or ask a last question?
Yeah, we still have a few minutes if anyone has anything. If not, then we can wrap up early.
Well, I don't know about everybody else. I just thought this whole presentation was fascinating and helpful, and really has given me a lot to think about in terms of my own responses. So thank you so much, Mark. Really wonderful examples, wonderful little exercise, and I hope everybody got from it as much as I did. If you by chance would like to listen to it again, it was recorded and it will be available on the SRQ Strong website. And I guess you can get it on, we have an archive of Facebook Live videos on our Facebook page.
So it'll be available immediately after this on Facebook, the entire recording. And then later this week, I will send out a recording to our mailing list. So if you registered tonight, you're going to be on our mailing list. You'll get the recording, and we'll also send out some resources with it. as well.
Yeah, and please do sign up for our mailing list on the website or just by emailing us. Then you'll get notification of upcoming forums and other events that we're having. And I think Annalise has one to share with you now.
Yeah, so it's going to be our deep dive. So for people who have tuned in and for new people, this is kind of our new format for this year for 2022. We've decided to do our virtual conversation 1 month, and then the next month we are going to meet in person and we're going to dive deeper into the topic that we talked about tonight. So we'll actually be able to do, in-person exercises like Mark did with us tonight, except a little deeper. And then of course, we're going to have Betsy, who was supposed to be our second speaker tonight. She wasn't able to make it, so she'll be at the in-person one. So that's going to be here in Sarasota. So sorry for our international people that are tuning in tonight. It won't be a virtual thing. It is in person in Newtown Community Bible Church. Monday, September 26th. It's the fourth Monday of every month that we do these, and it's from 6 to 7:30 p.m. So we will send this reminder out with a link to register at the end of the week for everyone. So yeah, we hope to see everyone in person that can make it. And thank you again for everyone that tuned in tonight. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you for everyone for, engaging in the chat and, sharing your experiences. It was really a really great conversation. I was really happy to see everyone, chiming in. So thank you.
Everyone have a good evening. Thanks again, Mark. And thanks to all of you for joining us. And please come back for the deep dive.
Yeah, bye.
Even
everyone.
if you're in Australia, you're welcome to come.
All right. Bye, everyone.